Do not come. Do not come.
Vice President Kamala Harris is getting universally slammed, including by members of her own party, over comments made during a news conference with Guatemala's president. So before I get to anything else, let me play that clip for you.
I want to be clear to folks in this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border. Do not come. Do not come. The United States will continue to enforce our laws and secure our border. There are legal methods by which migration can and should occur. But we, as one of our priorities, will discourage illegal migration. And I believe if you come to our border, you will be turned back. So let's discourage our friends, our neighbors, our family members from embarking on what is otherwise an extremely dangerous journey.
All right. So I'll get to some of the reactions online in a second here. First, just to address these comments myself, I mean, what she's saying here is just wrong. It's not only morally reprehensible, it's also just factually wrong. And politically doesn't make any sense, especially based on what Joe Biden has just recently done. So we'll get to a lot of that in a minute here. First, Kamala Harris, once again showing that she is purely a careerist. I mean, this has been obvious over the course of her career. It was obvious while she was running in the Democratic primary, and it's obvious now. She doesn't actually have any principles, doesn't actually care about anybody. She's simply running for her own career. And if she has to say this to maintain her position, then she'll do that. So before I get to, again, any of the reactions, let me first go over some of the insanity here and just how wrong Kamala Harris is. So first of all, this is a violation of international asylum laws. It is 100% legal for people seeking asylum to go and seek asylum. So the idea that Kamala Harris discusses that there are legal means to do this, yeah, the legal means to go about it is through seeking asylum, as these people fleeing their country are doing. So more on that from Amnesty International. The rights of migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers are protected by international law, regardless of how and why they arrive in a country. They have the same rights as everyone else, plus special or specific protections, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 14, which states that everyone has the right to seek and enjoy asylum from persecution in other countries, the 1951 UN Refugee Convention and its 1967 Protocol, which protects refugees from being returned to countries where they risk being persecuted, the 1990 Migrant Workers Convention, which protects migrants and their families, and regional refugee law instruments. So asylum seeking is legal. The idea that Kamala Harris is claiming that there are legal ways to do this, yeah, the legal way is through seeking asylum, which these people fleeing their country are doing. Now, it also doesn't make any sense what she said here from a policy standpoint, as back in May, Biden raises refugee admissions cap to 62,500 after delay sparks anger. So initially, Biden said he was going to maintain the Trump-era figure of only 15,000 as a refugee cap. And then because of the anger that sparked, he increased it to supposedly 100,000, but starting with this lower number just to, get it rolling. But what Kamala Harris said here doesn't make any sense, considering that Biden raised the refugee cap, which, by the way, I mean, these Trump-era numbers, they were lower than Canada. Despite the fact that the U.S. has 10 times the population, Canada was resettling more refugees than the U.S. So this number now is going to come back up, supposed to come back up under Joe Biden. So what Kamala Harris is saying here from a policy standpoint also doesn't make any sense. And also from a public polling standpoint, doesn't make any sense. The public are in support of refugees. So a lot of data showcases this. Here's a couple examples I'll show you. This from Vanderbilt University. Favorable public opinion toward refugees has been on the rise since the beginning of the 21st century, and it has sharply increased since 2017. This research shows that anti-refugee policies do not align with either historical trends or current popular support. So this is their research, but more research also shows us this from Pew Research. In assessing the situation at the U.S.-Mexico border, the public views several goals as important, but more people give priority to addressing the backlog of asylum cases and improving conditions for asylum seekers than to making it harder or easier for asylum seekers to be granted legal status. Overall, 86% say it is either very or somewhat important to increase the number of judges handling asylum cases. Nearly as many, 82%, say it is important to provide safe and sanitary conditions for asylum seekers once they arrive in the U.S., including 52% who say this is very important. So, the public are in support of asylum seekers. Kamala Harris here is speaking to a shrinking conservative base that does not even vote for Democrats. So what she's saying here doesn't make sense politically. It doesn't make sense policy-wise. There is no reason at all for her to be doing this, except to continue this idea that immigrants are scary, that we should not be resettling people fleeing their country because they're living in horrible conditions under constant threat of violence. There is a reason why these asylum laws exist, to help people like that. So for her to go out there and discourage those asylum seekers is a violation of international law, as well as not making any political sense. Now let's get to some reactions to those comments. AOC came out condemning this, saying this is disappointing to see. First, seeking asylum at any U.S. border is a 100% legal method of arrival. Second, the U.S. spent decades contributing to regime change and destabilization in Latin America. We can't help set someone's house on fire and then blame them for fleeing. It would be helpful if the U.S. would finally acknowledge its contributions to destabilization and regime change in the region. Doing so can help us change U.S. foreign policy, trade policy, climate policy, and carceral border policy to address causes of mass displacement and migration. So AOC making the correct observation here that the U.S., of course, has been heavily involved in destabilizing Latin America, and that to then turn around and discourage asylum seekers from seeking asylum in the U.S. is just morally reprehensible, on top of course being a violation of international human rights. More reactions here. This from Oluyemi Olurin, who's a public defender in New York City. Quoting Kamala Harris here, there are legal methods by which migration can occur. List them. I'm sick of this myth that you can decide you want to live in America and you will fill out some paperwork and you're done. False. It is hard to get to America legally, and it's even harder to stay. This from Enrique Acevedo. He's a 60 Minutes correspondent, saying the VP went all the way to Guatemala to send a message to the Republican base here in the U.S. This statement is hardly going to persuade migrants fleeing violence, bad governance, climate change, or the effects of the pandemic. This statement was not for them. And this from Abraham Gutman, who is of the Philly Inquirer, saying American politicians talk about immigration as if refugees and asylum seekers plan the wrong vacation. You think they don't know how dangerous the journey is? Of course they do. You know why they take the risk? Because staying is even worse. The cruelty is the point. So yeah, Kamala Harris here, really, her comments indistinguishable from Donald Trump, Mike Pence, or any other Republican. Just completely disgusting and absolutely doesn't serve her politically. It's, again, incorrect legally, and also just morally reprehensible considering the U.S.'s involvement in destabilizing Latin America.